What's up guys, this is Cher talking, welcome back to my channel. On today's video, I'll be making a full review for the Ultra Deluxe Aslana Melek banner that brings two new UDX styles that will be limited, Aslana Melek and Fullbright XXIII, but also a Platinum style called Bruni. This will be added later to the Platinum pool, so you can get it without having to summon here. But what are these characters? Aslana Melek is an endurance and will buffer, but also can apply damage block to the party. Fullbright is a support unit that can debuff and buff, and Bruni is a specialist that decreases spell and indirect damage. Now, let's move into the rsrs.xyz website, and we have Aslana Melek as the name of the banner. She is amazing. She is a martial artist, but does not need any element. Damage is not really all that great, but she's a support unit, so 111 agility and 108 STR are more than enough. Her endurance suffers a little with 74, and her will could be much better since we do have support units which much higher than this. She still needs some intelligence to debuff, and the other status won't matter. So moving for passives, she starts the fight with 12 BP and actually gets another 3 every turn for a total of 6. And she also grants all surviving allies Substitute Sculptor and Glory of Beauty on start of every turn. So this passive here is amazing. Substitute Sculptor will give you 1 damage block after you get attacked. So it means everyone in the party. Let's say a boss attacks like 2 times per turn. The first hit you take full, the second one will be negated. That's right, you will not negate ailments though. If a boss attacks way too many times, like 4, 5, 6 times, this is not as powerful, but for bosses that attack 1, 2, 3 times, well, this will be very good. I mean, if he attacks just once, it will not have an effect, but some bosses sometimes attacks multiple times in one turn, less times in another, and that's how it works. The second passive, Glory of Beauty. When anyone is attacked by an attack that will cause resist, well, mostly will be resisting if you are choosing the right equipments, you will buff your STR, Dexterity, and Intelligence by 5%. So, the first passive is more geared towards fights where you actually take less hits. Like I said, bosses that attack 2, 3 times. But the second one will be actually very good when you are facing a boss that attacks multiple times, so that you can get more buffs. STR, Dexterity, and Intelligence are offensive status, and for martial arts, you still need agility, but you are at least increasing half of the mechanic. Nice, but you should treat this as an extra. The main mechanic here is to grant that damage block after you get hit. Just remember that it only lasts for 1 time and 1 turn. Now, the second passive, Offense and Defense Inspiration. She grants all surviving allies an attack boost that increases attack by 15%, and defense boost that increases defense to reduce damage taken by 15% as well. She also already recovers 2 BP, like I said, for a total of 6. Then we have Intrinsic Emarts 4. She increases damage potential by 20%, reduces damage taken when resisting by 40, and has 37% chance to evade resisted attacks. So, you have a good kit, her damage is not even important, but she does reach at least 35, and she'll get some status buff if she gets her passive to trigger, and she will still apply that damage block that's already very good passively. Skill number 1 is called Rotation Kick. It's single target, just blunt damage, and when the attack lands, there is a chance to debuff the endurance of the enemy by 15% on max level. Since this one is free, it's actually very nice using her rotation. Her intelligence is not that great as a debuffer, she may fail most of the time, but it doesn't really matter. Debuffing endurance doesn't really help much. The second skill is called Muscle Sculpture. It grants all surviving allies a defense boost of small effect, decreasing damage taken by 15%, does not need to be leveled up, and also recovers HP by 250. The bad part of this is that defense boost only lasts for 2 turns, and that's way inferior to something that we just got in Liz. Liz's newest style is amazing. She has that skill that is called Dragon's Blessing Plus, and it does a defense boost of medium, in fact, that decreases by 25 instead of 15, and lasts for 4 turns, so you can actually use this 4 times in a row for 4 stacks. This is amazing. And she also recovers HP, but also gives BP. So it costs 7, but it's actually 6, and she also gets 1 BP back. So in the end, Liz has the best type of support with this skill. Now, this skill is not something that you should be relying too much, since her skill number 3 is her selling point. It's a single target attack that hits between 3 to 4 times with blunt damage, and, well, if the enemy can counter, it will be interrupted, but every time that she lands an attack, she buffs endurance and will by 25%. Yes, it's just E power, I know, but even 3 times with E power, it's already triple S power. 4 times, it's already 4S power when compared to other types of skills, especially if you are using a triple S weapon. And now, even if you do not consider the damage, look on this type of buff. Turn 1, she's a character that does have very good agility. You can buff 75% endurance and will, or even 100% endurance and will. How would you do this with other buffers? You can't. You would have to bring like 2 or 3 buffers or even 4 buffers to reach that much value in a single turn. Of course, she cannot use this again on the next turn. She uses all that she has on turn 1. But she can use rotation kick for free, and then on the 3rd turn she goes and use attractive dance once more. So the buff decay happens, but it's not as strong as some other buffers will have, since she will have at least 75% every 2 turns. So I just run the math. In worst case scenarios, once you get her running in turn 3, you have at least 75% buff value. When you consider the worst turn, that's turn 4, and a max of 100% buff value active on turn 4. That's the worst turn as well. So that's a lot of status buff, and you'll be able to survive some ailments without much problem, and especially versus Aberration, Supreme, and there are some bosses like Basil Galeo that sometimes try to apply buffs on you on a specific turn, and then he will remove your buffs on specific turns, so you can choose when to use this, observing the enemy behavior, and to try to protect in the best turns. And Aslana Melek was released to compete, kinda, with Razin. Yeah, Razin has a very nice setup where he also buffs endurance and will, but especially will now that it's something that you need to keep buffing in many fights. When you use Elite Zone, you'll be buffing will by 25%, and then you have another 15% via passive, and if you chase, you buff again by another 15 plus 15. So you have 70% will buff when you attack 2 times with Relief Zone. That happens only 50% of the time though. Razin is not capable of using this skill all the time, so he will have some very good turns, while some other turns won't be as good. Razin and Aslana Melek still stack, but she has even better buffs than Razin. And Razin will be buffing more will when you consider that Relief Zone, while Aslana Melek will be buffing the same values for both endurance and will. She works for any sort of fight. Of course, we always prefer to use will buffs versus enemies that applies ailments, while you can still take the defense boost route when you are dealing with enemies that do physical. There's a lot of value on Aslana Melek, and you have to remember that you start the fight, you buff those 2 values, and you still have that damage block on the 2nd hit. So, very awesome type of support in a character that will be meta and very useful from now on. Sadly, it's just that her banner is UDX, and you have to invest a lot to get such a character. Aslana has another S style on JP, and you can inherit a heal spell that uses LP. It's very cheap, just 1 BP, and applies stealth. So she can actually just use this whenever she wants. She also has Mirage Kick Plus for an AoE STR debuff, but that will only be useful if you have BP batteries, so that she can still use her skill number 3. And there is this also Flower Rondo that applies Guard down and Morale up, but the values are pretty bad. So going back to the character, she is awesome, and she has a place in the meta as a very good endurance and will buffer, the top of the class. Beats Razin, but Razin has other utilities as well, like debuffing the enemy endurance and will, and also being able to apply attack and defense boost and healing, while Aslana Melek will only heal single target, and even in the future, because we don't have that style yet. Nonetheless, they both have different utilities sometimes. One does not fully replace the another, but you could say that Aslana Melek also deserves an OP grade in our tier list. And if you don't have Razan, I suggest you to summon for Aslana Melek. If you have Razan and you don't have gens, you are okay. You can wait for a rerun or just move forward and wait for similar characters in the future. The next character is Fullbright, and he is a buffer and debuffer with very high sustain. 100% endurance and 94% will are very good status, but he takes a hit by having very low agility when compared to other buffers and just 89% intelligence. His damage is not great, and he will not be the first character in your party to attack. He does have very high glove though. Moving for passives, on start of a turn he gets 1 BP, and he has 50% chance to buff all surviving allies status, all of them, by 15%. So, not reliable. When it happens, it's good. He also has a 50% chance to trigger an attack boost that will increase damage potential by 20%, lasts for 2 turns and can stack, and also a defense boost that decreases damage taken by 10%, lasts for 2 turns and stack. Again, not reliable 50% of the time. Still has yet another effect, 50% chance to apply a regen on the end of a turn that will recover your HP by around 250 or higher for 2 turns. It can stack as well, so it's unreliable. I don't like this type of support. It's much like what people use with Bunny and Media, but to a lesser extent, much lesser extent. Then the second passive is called Merchant's Talent, and when he's using skill number 1 or skill number 2, he will buff all status for all surviving allies by 5%, and they will also receive this attack boost that increases damage potential by 10%, lasts for 2 turns and can stack, and a defense boost that decreases damage taken by 10%, lasts for 2 turns and can stack. We'll talk more about that later. Then he has our all defense 7, decreases damage taken at all times by 50%, so he won't take too much damage, and he can survive to support the party. Skill number 1, Defamation. It's a support AoE spell that does not do damage. It grants the enemy's morale down, medium, that they will decrease their damage output by 25%, and also guard down, medium, decreasing the defenses by 25%. But the thing here is, morale down is much more important than guard down. Guard down increases your damage output, but not exactly by 25%. Morale down will also not decrease by 25% because you already have a lot of other defensive layers. But it's very cheap, just 3 BP. He can use this anytime he wants. Since he actually recovers 1 BP per turn, he has a 4 BP cycle. And it will trigger all of his additional effects that you saw here, the attack and defense boost. The second skill is Photosphere Shot Plus. This is the same spell that you saw in Halloween Princess Rose. So she was a meta character in a long time ago, and she had this skill that was just a debuff to endurance and will, and that's it. Now it's much better. It is adding a very big endurance buff. You can see here that it got an improvement to damage. It tries to debuff the enemy endurance and will by 15%. His intelligence is not that great. But then he will also buff all surviving allies endurance by 40%. That's very great. And he can actually keep using this for many turns. And if you have someone in your party like Liz, she fixes the problem with BP generation, and he can use this every single turn. And Photosphere Shot also triggers all the other effects if you want. And let's see what you actually get from all of this. You will get 40% endurance buff every single turn. You will then have 2 stacks of attack boost and defense boost starting from turn 2. So 2 stacks of 10% and 5% buff to all allies every turn. This doesn't matter too much. You still have the chances to trigger the other attack and defense boost and the other buffs and the other regen, but they are not so reliable. Or you can decide to just go with his main cycle of using Defamation first and then Photosphere Shot Plus. You will be using 8 PP in 2 turns, and he has exactly that. But there's one problem that I forgot to mention. Defamation is not fast, and he has very low agility when compared to other buffers. So he may not go before the enemy attacks, and if your morale down just works in 1 turn, you are better off actually using Photosphere Shot cycle than Defamation. The third one is Light of the Sun. This is a fast recovery spell that can be used 2 times per battle. Uses 5 BP, and it has D power for recovery, but it should be enough to recover everyone from 0 to max if you train this to max. And besides recovering, reviving, it will also apply evasion for 1 time and 1 turn. This can be used to fight versus Time Lord and avoid the instant kill, or in many other situations. This skill is also found on Maria, a character that people still use because she has Scrum Guard, decreasing damage taken by 20% when everyone is alive, and she also has Light of the Sun. This skill was buffed for global. We can use it 2 times, while on JP you can only use it once. Well, Maria also buffs status, but she buffs by 25%. She can also recover, and she also has this very unique... and she still has that ailment resistance buff with a 1 BP skill. And she gives BP to everyone that she recovers. That's actually very interesting in some situations. Fullbright is not a direct competitor to Maria. I have to say that Maria is still better, because she has that Scrum Guard active most of the time, and she can decide to buff all status in higher values. But if you just want endurance, that's what you want, and you can take benefit, well, Photosphere Shot every turn can be good, and when you need to recover, use Light of the Sun. And if you want, you can inherit that Earth Heal spell. This time it uses 1 LP, and it revives, recovers, and cleans from ailments. That's important sometimes. So he does have at least a single target heal if you already use your Light of the Sun 2 times. Fullbright is a nice support. He competes with Maria. Sometimes you may want to use him instead of Maria. Maria has a better general utility, and we consider her an OP grade, but that thing is changing. She may be demoted soon. Fullbright is, in my opinion, just a triple S grade style, but he does have his utility. Can be used here and there, especially when you want endurance buffs. Sadly, you usually prefer will buffs instead of endurance buffs because they protect you from ailments, and fighting versus enemies that uses physical attack can be done by boosting defense instead of just boosting endurance. Sometimes you need to boost both things, but not all the time. That's why Fullbright is good, but also very easy to skip. Aslana Melek is much more unique. The last character is Bruni, and, well, he is very good for a Platinum style. 101% endurance and 107% will, with 98% dexterity and 90% intelligence. He is a hybrid. You can see using rapiers, but also having access to earth spells. Love and charisma are just average. The only really bad thing about Bruni is the agility being just 61%. For first passive, when using Gen Digger, he has some effects. When using Gen Grace, he has other effects. We'll be talking more about that later. He has Scrum Guard and is the first Platinum style with access to this that decreases damage taken by 20% as long as everyone is alive. He also decreases damage taken by 30% at all times, and by another 50% if attacked by spells. Yeah, when used versus enemies that use spells, he will hardly die. Skill number 1 is Gen Digger. It's a support self skill that recovers his BP by 3, so in that turn he gets 6. And he also buffs his will by 40% if you level this to max, or just 30 on rank 1. When you are using this skill as well, he will recover the limit of Gen Grace, skill number 2, with a 50% chance. And he also recovers his own HP, always by around 250. Now, Gen Grace is a support, fast self skill as well, that can be used once per battle, unless you charge it by use of Gen Digger, and grants him defense stance versus spells that decreases their damage by 25%. This does not stack, lasts for 3 turns, and for all other surviving allies, he applies defensive stance versus indirect attacks, decreasing them by 25%. Lasts for 3 turns, does not stack. Defensive stance versus indirect attacks was first saw on Iskander. That's actually a very good type of support because all spells are indirect, so you are covering all types of spells, but also some indirect physical skills. So Bruni gives the best version of the effect to all surviving allies, while he himself is always focused on spells. Well, he will also buff all other surviving allies' will by 40% if you level this up to max manually, but not himself. So he buffs himself in one turn and buffs the other people in the other turn. Also, when activating Gen Grace, you will buff all other surviving allies' charisma by 20% since this is via passive, and will also grant all other surviving allies, but not himself, a defensive stance versus spell, decreasing spell damage by 25%, lasts for 3 turns. The thing here is that you will not be able to keep Gen Grace active at all times because you will sometimes fail to recover, but when you have both the defensive stance spell and the defensive stance indirect, they will stack. If the enemy uses a spell attack, because a spell, it's both spell and also indirect. So there's some interesting utility here. The only problem is that it's unreliable and reliant on charging Gen Grace via the use of Gen Digger. Well, at least in 2 turns, you have 9 BP. The first skill is free, the second one uses 9. With good RNG, you can cycle between those two, but with bad RNG, you have to keep using Gen Digger when Gen Grace doesn't trigger, and you can decide to use his skill number 3, Gold Conductor, that he stole from Tsubaki. Tsubaki has a very good style that it's now not so important, but in the past it was used to fight versus enemies that uses spells. She has this defense stance spell triggering all turns. She already has Scrum Guard, and she could buff will and debuff intelligence with Gold Conductor. In the case of Tsubaki, she will even debuff intelligence further when attacking, and had a 4 BP per turn cycle. So she does damage, she is fully focusing on buffing will and debuffing enemy intelligence. But the problem with Bruni is that he has a very terrible agility with just 61%. If you want to use Gold Conductor on turn 1, you will not attack before the boss. And his intelligence is maybe not as high as it should have been to debuff the enemies, but at least will buff is 30% on max level. So I will say that when you start a fight with Bruni, you should actually use that Gen Grace first, because this one will buff all surviving alliance will, and it will apply the defensive stance so that you can decrease damage first, since it's fast. And then after that, you will have to use Gen Digger. And then after you use it, Gen Digger, if you charge it another Gen Grace, you will use Gen Grace. If you didn't charge, then you will use Gold Conductor. And then you are back to Gen Digger. Did you charge Gen Grace? Use Gen Grace. If you didn't, use Gold Conductor. That's why defensive stance lasts for 3 turns in his case, because he can fail. It's unreliable, but for example on Remembrance, you just need to clear once, right? For real challenges, people will not be using Bruni, but maybe in some serious challenges, yeah, he can work if you get the guy. The problem with him is more about the agility for Gold Conductor, since this one will only be buffing and debuffing after the enemy attacks. For inheritances, we have Entangle Plus, if you will amplify, that can do C power damage and apply stun. Nothing important. He then has 3 more that can also stun, and it's also cheap, can also be amplified. For Hypergravity, that can debuff the enemy agility, but well, he is very slow and he may even miss this type of spells because it will be using his agility and intelligence. Hence why in this style he's not actively using spells. He's going to miss. That's why I believe you should actually ignore spells and use him as he is. Is he bad? No, he works, but he's not exactly a better Tsubaki. He's just a side grade, and Tsubaki is a little easier to use. With all that said, he takes an SS Plus grade in the tier list because he does have some support that can work if you need. Now, you should not care about this character. You only get him by accident, and eventually you get him via platinum tickets. With all that said, let's get back to the banner image. Is this banner worth summoning for? Well, yes, but no. Aslana Melek is a meta character, a very powerful one, and we do like to summon for support units because they have a better sustain and lifetime than damage dealers. And Aslana Melek has big buffs that make a difference in some fights. It's not like you will not clear content without Aslana Melek, but she was made for some fights like Spiral, but some floors will also buff break you, so Aslana utility is decreased. It still has a damage block that can help, but in many other cases, You can also use people like Liz or Joe that will also decrease damage taken. Still, an OP grade tier character that will be useful for the Forest Hero future. But Fullbright is just good. He's not as good as Liz, for example. But he can buff Endurance, that's not as important as buffing Will. But if you get the guy, maybe you see some utility here and there, but it's just not as good as Aslana Melek. And Bruni is Platinum. You eventually get the guy, even if you have to wait some time and spend lots of Platinum tickets. So I'll be giving this banner a Silver award, just because of Aslana Melek being very good. But it's a 1% banner for most people. And I will only recommend pulling if you don't have Razan. If you have Razan, then it's your choice, your gens. I will wait to see what's coming next, but right now, Monsters banner are not as interesting as Aslana, and if you wanted to summon for her, you have the chance. With all that said, this is my opinion. What is yours? Please say here in the comment section. I am undecided about pulling here. Maybe if I get some extra gens, I'll decide. But thanks so much for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't, and I see you soon in the next video or live stream. Bye.